In this episode, we discuss when to involve tech transfer for clinical trial agreements. What is a tech transfer office? Is tech transfer the best place to negotiate equity in intellectual property from charity-funded research? For a nonprofit, is taking a return on investment a good idea? How do you resolve conflict within the industry's work for hire and the university's co-research claims? Why is the physician interested in the output? Our guest is Istvan Fekete, director at Huron. And I am Darshan Kulkarni, principal attorney at the Kulkarni law firm. I focus my attention on FDA-regulated companies and their service providers, including issues involving medical affairs, clinical research, and drug advertising. Let's get into it.
Ish, it's great having you on as always. Quick question for you. When should a sponsor start looking at a tech transfer office in terms of dealing with a clinical trial agreement? Or should they really be dealing directly with the investigator?
The investigator is always your front door as a sponsor, right? Because if the investigator doesn't want to do your study, that's the end of the conversation, right? Tech transfer really on your standard industry-sponsored clinical trial agreement should never have to get involved.
What is a tech transfer office?
So I think a common misconception is that universities are not in the business of developing and commercializing IP. Wrong. Every project a university engages in, they hope to make money. Well, they don't commercialize things themselves, but they license IP that their scientists invent to entities that will commercialize it. Who does that licensing? Tech transfer offices.
Are tech transfer offices the best place to negotiate an equity stake in the IP that is created by an investigator based on funding provided by a charitable organization?
The problem is they don't have an infrastructure to actually facilitate the licensing in the way the universities do with tech transfer offices, right? Universities have been developing and licensing IP for a long
30 years.
time, right? Yeah. These nonprofits are just kind of putting these clauses into their agreements without any track record of bringing products to the market. And so I think the government with Bayh-Dole made the same realization. Why are we taking ownership of this IP when we're not really set up to be the ones to bring it to market? Let's let the universities own it because they are, right? And that's the same advice I would give to nonprofits is, you're going to mandate this kind of stuff, you better make sure you have a real good process and a real good track record of being able to bring products to market. Otherwise, you're just sticking your nose into a process that already works and you're making it more difficult.
If you need assistance with your clinical trial agreements, contact us at darshan@kulkarnilawfirm.com.
Giving a charitable organization the right to at least have a backstop and say, if you don't do it, we have the right to come in and do it. And or if you do commercialize it, we have the right of getting some money, some return on our investment. Why do you think that's a bad idea? And why do you think it's a good idea?
I wouldn't say that I think that that's a bad idea. I understand the logic, right? As a nonprofit, I need money for my operations, right? I'm not a for-profit company. I funded research. It developed IP that came to the market. Revenue was being generated. I should get some of that revenue to continue my mission. I don't disagree with that premise. And, if you ask me which way do I lean, I think that's probably appropriate. The point I was trying to make is it does make licensing more difficult, right? That does make licensing a more complicated conversation. Now, the other part of this, the analogy that I would give you is this. If I go to my mechanic and I say, hey, if you don't fix this car in 3 days, I'm going to take it back and fix it myself. That's not going to work because I'm not a mechanic. And so if you as a nonprofit want to say, if you don't do your due diligence with this IP, then I have rights to it and I have rights to license it, then you better make sure you actually have an ability to license it. And that's where I see the gap, right?
What industry wants very often is work for hire. The pharma company or the medical device company comes in and says, you're doing the research for me, I own all the intellectual property. On the other hand, the university takes the position, this is not work for hire, this is co-research. Talk to me about how you resolve that conflict in how things proceed.
There is a professor that has an algorithm that analyzes boilers. Okay. That professor, a company approaches that professor and says, can you please have your algorithm analyze our boiler? The professor's interest in doing that is to hone their algorithm and test their algorithm, right? They don't actually care what the results about that particular boiler are. Okay. You can set that up as a fee for service arrangement. You company, you own the output related to your boiler. We own our background IP, the algorithm, and any improvements that come out of the algorithm related to this project, right? Win, 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 right? Everybody gets what they want.
What do you see as the physician's interest in the output? Because I would argue the physician actually has no interest in the output. You're doing exactly the same thing you were doing before. You don't really care what the output is in terms of the data being generated.
It depends on the interests of the investigator, right? So for instance, let's say institution is hired to be the sample processing hub for a clinical trial agreement, right? In that situation, it's probably appropriate to set that up as a service agreement, right? Where the sample analysis, the results of that are owned by the pharmaceutical company. Now, why did the pharmaceutical company likely choose that university? Because they had some proprietary method of analyzing such samples, right? So that proprietary method remains owned by the university, and any improvements to that proprietary method are owned by the university. However, let's take a different example. We have a compound that is in the preclinical stage of development, right? So we're testing it in a mouse model. Well, in that scenario, the PI is very likely to be interested in what those results are sharing and will likely want to build off of that in future research projects, right?
I love it. Ish, this was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Darshan. I appreciate you having me as always.
If you need assistance with your clinical trial agreements, call me at 302